Why is this country in need of a revolution, and a Ron Paul revolution in particular?
Well, you know, there was a statistic last week. I think 90% of the people were annoyed about what's happening in the economy and the future of this country, and they're very annoyed with what's happening. So we need to change. Everybody is talking about that. The big question is which way are we going? Even the other candidates, the conventional candidates, are out there talking about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make change, and they talk about, but they're not very specific.
Yeah, you don't seem to have a lot of faith that they are actually agents of change.
And yet the economy as it sits today, as Alex discussed, is factors worse. Factors worse than it was in 1992. And yet we sit here in early April of '08, and it is by far not yet the economy stupid.
The people in this country are concerned about what is happening. But we have to target where the real problem is. We have to understand monetary policy. We have to understand foreign policy. We have to understand that freedom is much better than slavery and interference and manipulation by the government and the bureaucrats. So if we truly care about our fellow man, this is what we have to advocate.
But sadly, the American people they're befuddled by the illusions of this economy.
You say in your book, quote, no wonder the news networks would rather focus on $400 haircuts than matters of substance. There are no matters of substance. Do you really believe that? Because the candidates are out there, they're talking about health care, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about the Iraq War. Those are substantial issues.
Yeah, but it's all pretty much status quo or more of the same, where we don't go out and pretending to police the world. Even President Bush ran on, don't police the world, and let's not go into nation building. And that's what we're doing, and we're going bankrupt. So we need to get busy and really have change, because we need to immediately balance the budget, pay down some of the debt, let people go back to work, bring our troops home, have sound money. That's a revolution.
So what does it mean for November? It means that Americans, as I said, are simply too easily seduced. Americans are simply too easily seduced by the illusions, not the realities of the U.S. economy.
Freedom brings people together in the system that we have today. Welfareism and socialism always divides people, especially after it's recognized that the country is getting poorer. And that's where we are today. We are getting poorer, although on the surface there seems to be still a lot of prosperity. It's based on debt. People are getting poorer today because their house values are going down, and they borrowed against the house equity. And the country is poorer because we owe more money than ever before. $2.5 trillion we owe. And the entitled obligations of $72 trillion. So we're much poorer than we really appear to be.
This economy, as I said, is a complete mess. It is not anywhere near its bottom. I don't envy the man or woman who gets to be president on January 20th, given the difficulty of the fixes ahead. And it's going to take a massive role for government to turn it around.
If we followed the law of the land and we understood economic policy and we cared about the poor people and wanted to make sure there was prosperity in this country, we would not have a Federal Reserve System at all.
The starkness of this campaign on the economic issues should be much greater than even Mr. Roosevelt found in his contest with Mr. Hoover. It's not there yet. So it's such a confused landscape, and yet as I did a bit, I can tick off degrees of concern, facts about this economy that are so perilous, so difficult to address, so difficult to fix. I can't figure out, and I think that's what we might have fun with today, is why isn't this the political issue of the moment? Because it sure should be. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leo.
Besides, if we continue to borrow, the interest rates are going up, and they're starting to loan us less readily than ever before. So we shouldn't borrow anymore. That, passes the debt on to the next generation. And we shouldn't print anymore, because that, perpetuates the problem. So if we don't want to tax, we don't want to borrow, and we don't want to print, what are we going to do? Very simply, cut spending. And we can do that. We can do that.
Something that is very telling is we have had an incremental growth in the last 7 years in GDP point to point of about $4 trillion yet we have seen federal indebtedness rise, announced federal indebtedness rise itself by $4 trillion. We've seen consumer indebtedness rise by $7 or $8 trillion, and we've seen the states, half of the states, 25 of the 50, finding themselves in grave distress right now in a budgetary sense, and we are not accounting for this war in any practical, reasonable sense.
You mentioned interest rates just a second ago, and hand with that is the value of the dollar, which is partly responsible for why our oil prices are so high.
Right.
Back in the year 2000, you predicted the fall of the dollar, and you take aim at the Federal Reserve in your new book. You say, quote, Americans must reject the notion that one man, whether Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, or any other chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, can know what the proper money supply and interest rates ought to be. Only the market can determine that. You're all for abolishing the Fed. They're meeting over the next couple of days, tomorrow and Wednesday.
I guess I disagree with your fundamental point. I don't think the problem is related to the fact that the U.S. dollar is a principal reserve currency. In fact, I think the world economy, the U.S. economy, U.S. economic interest depend upon that remaining true in the years ahead.
To decide what to do about interest rates, what do you think is going to happen, and what do you think the result will be?
Well, they're going to print more money and try to lower interest rates because they're in a mess. But they got in a mess because they had interest rates too low and they printed too much money. So they created this problem by inflating the currency, and the only solution is inflate the currency more. And all I'm arguing there is that you follow the Constitution. There's no authority for a central bank, and only gold and silver is supposed to be legal tender. We knew, the founders knew what runaway inflation was all about, how they destroyed the continental dollar, and now we're destroying the dollar once again. It's a serious, serious problem economically and politically.
Because of the greater frequencies of financial crises, it's necessary, therefore, for the federal government to come in and be the equivalent of a lender of last resort, or to socialize the risk that was often taken by the financial institutions. Leo mentioned $850 billion in losses. The losses could, with the deleveraging, could grow. Essentially, we're going to be, for the next 3 to 5 years, moving debt out of the consumer, financial, private sector onto, in some ways, indirectly and directly, the government books. That means that deficits are going to increase.
And what will that do to the average person? What will that do to the middle class? Inflation is a tax, and it's a regressive tax. It hurts the poor and the middle class. The characteristic of the destruction of a fiat currency is the transfer of wealth from the middle class to the wealthy.
Getting rid of the U.S. as a reserve currency now, if you want the mother of all financial crisis,
Do that.
we would do that now.
Wall Street, in spite of some of the problems they have, it's being propped up. There's a lot of bailouts going. When the company goes broke, you can be sure the executives will get big bonuses, tens of millions of dollars bonuses. At the same time, what do the average person get? The average person gets higher cost of living, higher prices for gasoline and food, and that is a tax.
This economy used to be about the middle class growing from the bottom up as being the best thing for all of us. And then executive compensation went completely screwy, and the average CEO makes 400 times what his or her average employee makes, and don't count on them with the tax policies that enforce that to do the right thing here. But we lived for 80 years with an industrial policy, a manufacturing policy that was predicated on a vibrant middle class. And we sold our souls to the financiers and to excessive executive compensation. And this is the consequence of that as well.
I think Leo is on to something very important. There's a great deal of confusion and befuddlement about the economy, and one of the reasons is that we've taken the economy off the political agenda for the last 15 to 20 years.
The fact that polls show that people say the economy is the most important issue is at some level irrelevant, because they don't seem to care that much.